Hi, Julian here from PopcornFX. Today I'm going to show you how to create a simple dust motes effect, but not the usual dust motes effect that you, say, place in your level or tile over the entire level. I want to make actually a dust motes effect that follows the camera and that has particles seamlessly wrapping around the view, so you kind of have the impression of an infinite field of mote particles, but at a fraction of the cost. So I'm first going to create an empty effect that I will name dust motes. I will create a multiplier node and a layer. So if you're not familiar with Popcorn version 2, multiplier nodes are basically emitters where you control the rate of emission. So here I'm going to say it has to spawn 1,000 particles per second. I'm going to hit Ctrl R or click on that little icon there to reset the simulation, and now I can see that my particles are being pulsed and I have 1,000 particles. Well, actually 1,001. That's because the initial emitter counts as one particle. So here I will create a billboard node so I get a rendering. And here first I'm going to spawn the particles along a cube volume. So I will create a local to world node to get proper world space transformation, and here I'm going to drop a simple rand node where I will wire in a construct vector 3D inside which I place my world radius. So I'll just name that node world radius. Currently I'll keep it at 1. And here I'm actually gonna spawn in the cube that's between minus world radius and world radius. So here I'll add a neg node. So to spawn that dialog here, you can either do right click on a wire, insert node, right click on an empty space, or hit Control space on a wire. So if you see me pop that dialog without doing any action, I'm actually hitting Control space. So now we have our particles on that cube. I can spawn multiple versions of this effect on the grid using space in the viewport. And now what I actually want is to have this follow the camera, not just stay where it is, but follow the view. So to get the view position, I actually have a node which is view position. And if I replace the local position to world by an add with the view position, now I have particles spawning around the camera. So I'll quickly make the size a little bit smaller so it's easier to see. I'll reset the sim because I had all the previous instances still around. And now you can see that when I move, the particles are left behind. I increase their age a bit so it's easier to see. So that's because the view position and the add are only happening when the particle is born at spawn time. So if you switch the view to exec rate, you will see the nodes being colored by whether or not they're at spawn, evolve, or render. So here everything is running at spawn except the billboard renderer, obviously. And if I select my view position and set the exec stage to be evolve, now those nodes turn red, meaning they are evaluated at evolve time. And if I move my camera, you can see that the particles are now following the view. But this is not what I want either. I want them to stay fixed in world space, so to spawn around the view, to stay fixed in world space, but as I move, I'm going to want to wrap the particles that are behind me back in front, so it gives the impression of an infinitely tiling field of dust particles. So I will revert that to auto. And just to make the graph clearer, I will I will select all those nodes and hit Ctrl G and name that spawn around camera. Right. So now I have a single node spawn around camera that appears here in that list, and which contains all my logic to spawn around the camera. So I'm just quickly going to rename that input to spawn radius. So now before we do the wrapping, I am quickly going to add a physics node just so we have some minimal movement. And in the velocity, I will wire in a VRAN node, which is a random unit vector, which I will scale down so they move slower. Right, so we can already start seeing the dust motes bit. So to do the wrapping, I will disable the physics, and here I will want to place that in another node to keep things tidy. So I will just create a dummy add node just to Ctrl G and get everything wired up. So I will name that wrap around camera. Here we go. And when I open that wraparound camera node, now I'm going to edit this graph. So to wrap around the camera, the idea is that I'm going to normalize that cube of particles to 0, 1, and I'm going to use a fraction node or a floor node and subtract the floor from the actual normalized position, and this will give me a new position that I will then move back around the camera and remultiply by the world radius, so that I get a position between minus world radius and world radius again. So whenever a particle goes outside of that normalized unit cube, it will just automatically wrap on the other edge. So to do that, first I will subtract the view position so that my particles are around 0 instead of around the view. But here, instead of subtracting view position at spawn, I do want to subtract view position at evolve. And at the end, I will add back view position. And currently this is just a no up, obviously, because I'm just subtracting and adding the same thing. So now this is centered here between those two nodes. The value is centered, it's the position centered around 0. So here, if I divide by the world radius. So currently this is at 1, and our actual world radius is out here, and what I want is to wire that inside this node, inside the wrap around camera node, so I can just simply change the world radius in one place and have both nodes react accordingly. So here I'm just going to copy paste this input node, paste it here, and now when I go back I see the pin spawn radius, so I'll just wire that back in. Then same thing at the end, before adding back the view velocity, I will re-multiply back by the same value. Otherwise things will just go crazy every frame. Just tidying up a bit. So now this here is between -1 and 1. Before it was between minus world radius and world radius. Now here is between -1 and 1, and I actually want to have it between 0 and 1. So here I'm going to insert yet another node, which is a remap node. I could do that by multiplying by 0.5 and adding 0.5, but I find it easier to use the remap node. So by default the remap node has an old min, old max, new min, new max, which are all 0, 1, 0, 1. So by default it doesn't remap anything, but it allows you to say my input value is between whatever and whatever, and I want to remap it between whatever else and whatever else. So here it's between -1 and 1, and I want to remap it between 0 and 1. So the only thing I have to change is the old min, which defaults to 0, and here, which I want to be at -1. So the rendering disappears. This is because, well, every frame now I'm missing the counterpart here, so it moves the particles away from the view and they just shoot out to probably infinity or some large place. So here in the remap I'm going to take the value which is now 0, 1 and remap it back between -1 and 1. So here I'm going to expose the new min again. So before it was the old min, now I expose the new min to be back to -1. So I have my rendering back. Still no wrapping. But now we are at the interesting part. This part here has the value, the position value in the 0, 1 unit cube. So here what I can simply do is to subtract the floor of the position, and that's basically it. Here whenever the position goes out of the unit cube, this here will ensure it stays in the 0, 1 range. So now when I move around I don't see any trail of particles anymore, even if I move back very fast. So here I'm holding shift. Yeah, I'm basically right-clicking in the viewport and using WASD to move, and when I hold shift it moves faster, and when I hold control shift it moves a lot faster. So fast that I'm actually lost. So if I hit shift E it resets the camera. Right, so that's the basic wrapping behavior here. Now you might notice, I don't know if you can see this clearly in the video, here on this angle I can actually see the edges of the cube here where there are more particles, and also when I go forward I can see the particles popping. This will be even more visible if they live longer. So here I'm just reducing the simulation speed, just so I get less popping. But now when I advance you can clearly see them popping in and out. So to do that and to hide those edges, we could either for the edges spawn in a sphere but this is actually problematic because a sphere will not wrap the same as a cube, and it will behave badly when you travel in different directions, whereas the cube, it's pretty trivial, very cheap to compute. You do get a bit of loss here, because when we will fade the particles to make them appear as if they were fading in a sphere, we will completely lose those particles outside the sphere near the edges of the box. But that's actually a pretty small issue, considering the benefits of doing it in a cube. So here my node wraparound camera is basically done. Pretty happy with it. Just doing some minor OCD tidying up. Right. So to do the fading, what we can use is the distance between the view and the edge of the sphere contained inside that cube. And this is actually very simple inside that node. It's actually the length of the position in the -1, 1 cube, so it's the length of that value here. So I'll just type length. And here I will export that as a pin I will name fader. And small detail there, this will actually give me a value greater than 1 for those particles outside the sphere but still inside the cube. So I actually want to saturate that. So I can use the saturate node, either a clamp node between 0 and 1 or a saturate node. Or because the length guarantees me to never return anything below 0, I could actually use also a min with 1. Here I'm just using saturate for simplicity. An interesting thing here is that the graph optimizer in PopcornFX version 2 will actually see that this saturate is useless because the length never returns values below 0, and it will automatically replace it by a min with 1. So if I go back in my graph, now I have my fader pin here. The OCD kicks back in. I don't like it being above position. I actually want it to be below because I'm going to wire it into other nodes to compute the color and do the fading. So to do that, the editor actually uses the position of the export nodes, both input and output, to determine the order of the pins. So one option would be to move that under here, and I do have my fader below. By the way, to go back and forth, I'm using next and previous buttons on my mouse. That's why you don't see me clicking anywhere. But I don't like the option of moving that down there because I have more crossing wires and I don't like a lot of crossing wires. So instead, I'm just going to select the node and use the order value here. So I'll just put, let's say 10. I could have put just 1. As a habit, I like to make larger increments when you go back to your graphs and make them evolve a bit, update them, add new stuff. Often you will find yourself with explicit orders like that, you will find yourself having to change a whole bunch of nodes to increment orders because these are integers and you can't say 0.5, say. So when you want to insert a new pin between two existing ones, if they have contiguous IDs, well, you have to change all the IDs. So I like to make bigger increments. So now if I want to insert later on a node in between, I'll just have the option to insert it between 0 and 10 instead of between 0 and 1. So here I have my fader, and if I wire that inside the color, it's actually the other way around because it's 0 at the origin and 1 at the edge. So I will do a 1 minus node, and now the box edges have disappeared and the particles are actually fading out of the view instead of popping, which is pretty nice. So I'll change that to, let's say, a radius of 3. And I also increment the spawn rate to something like 5,000. And now I have my dust motes field seamlessly wrapping around the camera, no matter how fast I go. I can restore the physics node, hitting Ctrl+T, and everything is smooth and nice. So in the next video we'll see how to add some motion blur, camera space motion blur to these particles so that I get speed lines when I move, because here they just appear to be teleporting all around the place as I move so fast. Stay tuned for the next videos. Thanks for watching.